Coming up, Paul and I discuss the importance of telling stories, how we view our contributions to the team, getting the upper hand in a take it or leave it negotiation, and the importance of skills assessments. Plus, Edna Conway rejoins Paul to talk about intellectual property protection. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Brought to you by, do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending your assets? Have you penetration tested your public assets? Start 2018 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting at blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night. Are you getting pressure to improve your data security? Would you like a faster, easier, better way to patch? Then you need to check out Automox. Automox is a cloud-native platform that patches and manages every endpoint, even remote servers and devices, including Windows, Mac, Linux, and third-party software from a single dashboard. Improve your cyber hygiene, reduce your attack surface, and save 90% of the effort you spend patching. Automox, your patching system of record. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/BSW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Business Security Weekly, episode number 91. We're going to record this on Monday, July 9th, 2018. Well, we're recording part of it on Monday, July 9th, 2018. This is the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Our goal is to be your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. I remain Michael Santarcangelo, your straight talking guide to elevate performance and accelerate results. And joining me from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, your friend and mine, Paul Asadorian.
Hey, what's going on, Michael? It's good to be here.
Every time I read G-Unit Studios, I didn't understand it for a long time, and now I've been in studio, I understand that it's appropriately named because you're in the G-Unit. But then I always go back to like old school rap.
That's right.
It was a G-Unit. So
50 Cent.
I love how you work all this stuff out, man. It's fantastic.
There's a great. Speaking of that, it's kind of interesting. In preparation for a talk that I might give, I've been looking at hip hop, and there's a cool story about the business side of it and Dr. Dre. And pretty soon he's going to be, if not already, like the top grossing hip hop artist of all time. And that story's pretty amazing, dude. Pretty amazing.
Yeah. And looking at the business side of it, I think there's a lot there to take a look at. That'll be fun. Well, I hope you do the talk. We continue and we roll on with our summer. So just as a quick reminder, if you're picking us up here, we are exploring ways that we can give you everything you want in the time frame that you want. What we're seeing so far from some of our initial efforts on looking at the stats and looking at engagement and stuff is that most of you are craving something in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 minutes. So we're trying it out. We're tightening some stuff up. And we're going to continue to work on that programming, and you can always give us feedback on the parts you like, things you want to see more of, and how to make this better for you. One of the things that people do enjoy is the article discussion, and so Paul and I are going to break down a couple articles here with insights. And so what happens, just to remember, when I pick these articles, I'm not looking at stuff that's necessarily the latest and greatest because it just happened last week. I'm looking at things that give us insights into how we lead better, how we communicate better, how we make those decisions. And even when we look at things from a startup perspective, we're still thinking about the way then that a lot of us in our teams, as we're growing, and the challenges are pretty similar, and a lot of what we do applies, and where possible, Paul and I try to break that down and share that out. So this will come as no surprise. The Harvard Business Review, and I try to limit these. Those of you who are on the free subscription, if you're registered, you get 6 articles a month. Otherwise, you get 3. So I try to limit this so we don't get too crazy here with everybody. Technical experts need to get better at telling stories. Now, I'm not a big fan of the punch in the gut strategy. So this, and in fact, I know I've shared this with Paul a number of years ago when I really started focusing on helping people communicate. I got really excited that I was making a difference. I developed a framework. I had taught a couple classes. I showed some models. But I'd go to people, Paul, and I'd say, I can help you get better at communication, or I could help you communicate value, or whatever I'd say. If someone says it to you, how does that sound? Like, what are you hearing when they say that? Because I'll tell you what surprised me about it.
It sounds good, right?
But it also sounds like you suck at communicating.
Yeah.
And so the most common answer was, like you just said, well, that sounds great. I know a lot of people that would benefit from that. And if I said, well, how about you and your team? Oh, no, I think we're pretty good. Thanks for asking. Here's what changed. I then spent about 3 years really looking at, well, how could I assess communication? And this was around the time frame when everybody said, well, you need to be an effective communicator. And I'm the guy going, cool, what's that mean? And they'd say, right. Well, what you need to do is over communicate, which, by the way, worst advice ever. Just bought and rewatched Tommy Boy over the weekend, right? I mean, it's kind of like, I could take a crap in a box, put a guarantee on it. All you got is a guaranteed box of crap. We talk about that a lot with automation. If all you're doing is over communicating, but the substance, the style, the manner in which you're communicating is just creating friction, all you've done is create a lot more friction, which means you're going to burn people out faster, disconnect faster, right? All these different types of problems. So here's the point why I included this, because I don't like doing stuff that I feel is kind of slappy in the face. Yeah, you need to get better at telling stories. The idea is this. If you're in a technical field, you're probably really good at that technical field. The time it takes then to be really practiced at the craft of communication is certainly possible, but it doesn't tend to be something that's there. And I think what's important about this is the distinction that I learned when I started showing people the model. In fact, I didn't even finish that point. The point was this. When I came up with the model, Paul, and it took me 3 years, and I broke it down to, here, look for these 3 things, and this will tell you whether it's effective or not. Oh, well, then people wanted to see the model, and they come up and say, oh, I thought I was effective, but I see now I'm not. And I'll always say, can I improve the model? And they said, no, that worked. It helped me see it better. It's the same point here. You might be really good at security or even a specific element of security, which then means you understand the jargon, you understand the nuance, you understand the context, and those things for you become reflexive. This is not worrying about the curse of knowledge. This is just saying when you go to communicate, the way you would communicate to somebody in the same situation, or the way that you commonly communicate because you're giving directions, or you're asking for something, you're just interacting with people, doesn't necessarily translate to the craft of how to tell your story. And so their point was, if you need to, get help. Now, to be fair, there's not a ton of great training on this. There's some really good books out there. And this is, of course, what we try to help people do with this program.
And I think it's something that you can learn. And certainly,
absolutely.
Michael, you were part of that lesson for me. Jason Blanchard, who works for SANS, was part of that lesson for me. And around that time, when I was kind of working on my storytelling, I was like, wow, this is stuff that people can learn. I realized that, and I think today for me, Michael, it's almost like a self-testimonial or a form of a testimonial when you tell a story, right? You're putting it in context for your audience, whatever goal you have. If you're putting your communication in the form of a story, it's kind of like a testimonial, right? In that
it can be,
right, and that can be used to achieve a specific goal, right? And
no, that's the key point right there. Is the way I would say it slightly differently is we're trying to translate something into an experience, right? Stories are about experiences that someone else understands, and therefore we achieve whatever that particular goal is. So you'll often hear people say, well, as people, we're wired for story. Yeah, true, absolutely true. But that doesn't translate to, so therefore we know how to tell a good story. I learned this lesson I'm sure I've told this before, but when you do improv or you do stand-up comedy, you do any of those types of, you just do writing, what you realize is it's about editing, right? It's not so much the writing, it's the editing. It's getting down to the brevity, and it's getting down to just the essence of what people need, no more, no less, right? It's like least privilege, but for communication. There's an art form to some of that. That's why some people are really good at this. But yeah, you can learn all of this type of stuff. I pulled two key points.
Some people are just better at I think Johnny Blaze was telling me that Dave Chappelle got $50 million for 4 stand-ups.
There you go.
At Netflix, 3 stand-ups, $50 million. Dave's one of the best storytellers in the world.
And what I think is fascinating about that is think about how data-driven Netflix is.
Yeah.
So they understand how that's either going to keep subscriptions, create subscriptions, or otherwise generate revenue. Like they can tell you why that was worth it. And trust me, they're going to measure the return on that. But that's
now when I was doing the research into stories, and it's funny you put this in here, Michael. When I gave my talk at the social engineering conference, like I usually try and front end my talk with some type of story that relates to a point or a goal or an outcome that I want people to take away from my presentation, get their attention, put things in context, right? I didn't have one for this conference. So what I did was I talked about a story that I really liked, that I kind of drew inspiration from, and encouraged people to tell stories, in the front of your presentations, or just use that in a general communication format. So I really, to me, one of the greatest stories that I've heard, and it's very popular on the internet, is Bert Kreischer's The Machine. I mean, the way he tells that story, not only is it funny, but it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, it is masterful how he tells that story. And I really drew inspiration from that. And more of the art form that you talked about, Michael, right? Like, from you, I learned some of the mechanics, right? Characters, conflict resolution, right?
Yeah, some of the structure.
Yeah, and Jason too had a different take on structure, so I kind of merged those two together. What Bert had, man, is like flair and art form and style. Like wow,
yep,
like
remember,
the visual,
it's a triplet.
Mm-hmm.
Structure reveals substance, and then substance gets delivered with style.
And you get visual images as he tells the story. So I really learned how
a good story told well,
right? Like how you tell the story should conjure a visual image in the person's mind, and that's really important for them to relate to it. He's at an advanced level, and I love this. He tells the sub story that then relates back to his main story to reinforce a point.
Yeah, and callbacks. Like there's a lot of advanced stuff that he's doing there. That's just fantastic, and brilliant. It's great to study those, right?
Yes,
and break them down. I talked with somebody last week that had been in the very first communications class that I offered 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. He could still remember the examples that we used, right. and the stories that I showed of professionals who do this exceptionally well. And that's always going to be the trick in this is so then who do we pattern after? And the answer is go look at people who are professional communicators, people that have really studied it. But then don't say, okay, I want to be like them. Go say, what did they do and what did I like about it, right? That's the structure from the substance. And that, unfortunately, I can't really turn it off anymore, Paul. Like if you and I went to an event, I'm probably going to spend at least 50% of my time breaking down their structure, independent of their substance, and then figuring out where it goes, right? That's the breakdown concept. Here's the two things I picked off of this I think are worth reinforcing. First one is be plain in your language. It's the Hemingway approach. Be plain in your language, which means people can understand it. I think there's a misnomer, and they call it out here too. Because what we do is so technical, and we want to be technical, and we want to be precise, and we want to be correct, and I want to capture. Yeah, it ends up getting really confusing really fast, and we use these really complex sentence structures. And although that might work, if you're writing a novel 100 years ago, the functional reality is that people right now prefer simple. Mm-hmm. You can be formal or informal. You could be conversational. It's that the voice is not what I'm talking about. It's the time to distill those concepts, and this is the paradox. When you distill it down, I don't mean dumb it down, but when you take that time to translate it and to simplify that message, it actually enhances your ability. It doesn't diminish it. I always like to point out, if you're the smartest person in the room and you're acting like you're the smartest person in the room and no one else recognizes that you're the smartest person in the room, are you actually the smartest person in the room? And the other thing on this is one idea at a time. We make this mistake a lot in technology. I want to give you all the things. I still call it the perfect message fallacy. If I just push it all in front of you, you'll pick what you want out of it. No way. Think about the foundation. Think about the journey, right? All the stuff we talk about with marketing and everything else. What does everybody need to know? What do they actually know? Okay, cool. Start there. And then when you get that concept communicated, then you can come back. You can communicate the next, and then the next, and then the next. And it's break stuff down to the smallest pieces. Sean D'Souza does a great job of this, and he does a great job teaching us how to do this.
Absolutely. Well, we spent a lot of time on that first story.
We sure did. So we'll go faster to the other one. This overestimate my contribution to the team, I think, is important. We're in an age where we're burned out. and we're in an age where everybody's busy. And as we talked about on BSW 90, that there's some attention residue, and there's a penalty for task switching, and there's all sorts of stuff there that happens. So what I thought was kind of interesting was that our friend Tomas here wrote about overestimating his contribution, and he basically says, he boils it down to this: I know all the time I put into it. I know the trade-offs I made. I know the decisions I made. I know the sacrifices I made. And all I look at it with everybody else is, I don't know what any of that is. And as a result of that, it's easy to state, well, I did all the work. Well, I'm the difference. Well, I'm the whatever. When are they going to do it? And everybody else is looking at it, it's kind of saying the exact same thing. And his point is, stop for a second. Look at it from their perspective. Ask them the questions. Understand their reality. And then think about how you better improve your communication as a team to appreciate the different things that people are going through. I'll tell you right now, this is a big deal with a lot of the teams that I'm working with. Not so much that they're overstating their contributions, it's that we get so locked down in what we're doing that we're not always aware of what our colleagues are doing. That not only means that we've got gaps, it sometimes means we're not working efficiently because we're overlapping and duplicating efforts, and that's frustrating.
No, for
Black
sure.
Swan are never split the difference, folks. I love this. They do some blog posts, and this is one they actually sent out. They sent out recently, and it's something they wrote before, and it lays out the details really well. So this is worth, again, this book is worth reading or listening to. This is worth taking a look at as a good reminder. And what I really loved was this note-oriented opener. So the idea here is, and if we think about some of the ways that the book worked, it basically said, stop with this false yes, this Fisher getting to yes. Yeah, that was neat in the 70s, but now we're so conditioned for yes, 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 that we either don't trust it or they're false. Instead, you kind of want to get to a real no, not a fake no, but a real no, and you kind of want to let people have some comfort with saying no to figure out where you really need to focus. So he's saying, all right, so if somebody says, all right, so this is the deal, take it or leave it. I'm not negotiating with you, whatever. Like, what do you do? And I loved this. This first one, they call it the no-oriented opener, and you ask, is it disrespectful if I ask to clarify a few points? And what's interesting about this is you pretty much want them to say, no, that's not disrespectful. Mm-hmm. You actually want that no, because if they say yeah, that'd be disrespectful. Like, the point here is if they go yeah, okay, then now you know who you're dealing with.
Right,
okay?
Right.
Different tactic. But most of us would probably say, well, can I ask a few questions? No, go differently. Say, is it disrespectful if I ask to clarify? And it's confusing because I'm not expecting that.
It makes you realize how powerful that no response is. And
is it crazy?
For me, I looked at it when you were describing this, Michael, from this lens, right? When your marketing and sales deck for your security company leads in with, well, all these companies are being breached and this is a problem. And you're like, yeah. Like the dismissive yes is kind of dismissive, right? Like it doesn't really make an impact. When you see that slide in a marketing sales deck today as a security professional, you're like, yeah, okay. But like really what's the value, right? Now, how you flip that into getting a no response out of, there's a lot of different ways you could go with that potentially. But I think just realizing that yes response is not as impactful or powerful as you believe it to be is a good starting point.
The other thing I liked on this, they list out 4 points, but I just wanted to pick 3. They talk about using labels, but the approach to the label. So and labeling is really important, right? It's labeling something here, but what he said is it's also the tone of voice that matters. And in this case, you want to be differential. So the example is, it sounds like there's no movement on any of these points. Right, now you could say so it sounds like there's no movement on any of these points, right? Okay, that's confrontational. Mm-hmm. You could say, so it sounds like there's not really movement on these points. There's not really any space we can go on this. That's it. And then this is the key, right? Go silent. Let them answer. Let them figure it out. The other thing to do, and I like this, and I think the key here is so he's closing it again with label and a tone. Tone is generosity. I see it where it's so false, it's sickly sweet. I'd really recommend practicing true, genuine generosity. Like really learn to ask somebody, because then, if it's not really working, you could say, well, you've been very generous. It looks like there's nothing more here you can do. Thanks for your time. And if they can, they'll say, no, I can still do this, and if not, they can't.
I love labeling it because it's kind of like if you're a technical person and we talk about labeling, right? It's kind of like your QA test or whatever, right? Like you don't have to be right when you label something. You want to label it to see if you really understand that person's perspective, right? And that's what I love about labeling is it allows me to understand. Because a lot of times if you ask people directly, they're going to be coy about things. But if you label it, that's going to elicit either a no or a yes, right? Like either you labeled it right or you didn't. And maybe you intentionally labeled it wrong to like get that off the table. Like, okay, that's not what they're after, right?
Yeah, you could do that. You can mislabel something intentionally to just kind of evoke or provoke a reaction. This is also where stories come back into play, Paul. Once you've labeled something, if you're trying to get to an understanding of what I call navigating to mutual understanding, you can do what I call story swapping. So you can say, well, I'm kind of seeing it this way. Tell a story fast, tight, like minute long, and have them either say, if you have kids do this naturally, and you'll listen, you'll say, well, it's kind of like that, but it's more like, do you remember the time we blah, 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 blah?
Right,
and they go,
right.
oh, so is it like that? And eventually you go, okay, yep, we're on the same page. It's the same thing with adults, and that gives you that ability to do it. This next article here, I really liked this because now you have to read it because the title on it's misleading. It says how and when to inform your team of major developments in your business. Really what it's driving at is how transparent should you be? The reason I put this in is, and I love this as a trend, we're seeing a lot more security teams say, okay, I get it. We can't be no anymore. We need to be more transparent. We want to make decisions that are auditable. We want to show people our thought process. We want to invite them into it. And so what that does for a lot of people is they say, well, then I'll be transparent about everything. And what this article says is, yeah, hold on a second here. There's a spectrum of transparency, and you want to be committed to. In fact, I like this. I'm going to read it. I'm going to quote it verbatim. Leaders must remain committed to the truth while also respecting the fact that the truth isn't always what it seems. This nuanced understanding is vital when it comes to determining just how and when to communicate with your team. Yep. And basically the point is, you don't want to go so fast that it's not accurate. Like the way I would look at it differently is you don't want to get swept up in the emotion of a moment. You actually want to be that cooler head to say, let's go take a look at it. Let's make sure we understand it. Yes, I will act decisively. Yes, I will communicate with you clearly, right? Not over communicate, maybe not effectively, but I will be transparent with you. Let's go make sure we can be transparent about the right stuff. And I like that. And that's why it says don't share information in real time. It almost always is incomplete, not always accurate, oftentimes lacks context. You want to be complete and have context before you share with people. And it doesn't always go the way that people want it to. The other thing it says, though, which I really liked was, be careful with rumors. Like if you hear the rumor starting up, you've got to stop it. Like if a rumor gets out of hand, that's a bigger detriment than not. So there is a balancing act. And like, at what point do you step in on a rumor? I think, Paul, you and I have been doing this long enough that the answer is you learn after the first couple times because you step in too fast or too late. And eventually it's Goldilocks. You can figure out just right. Last piece that they like, and I'm curious your take on it, is look for facts. So instead of talking about what you think or how you feel, just give me facts. Give me evidence. List it out. We observed this in this context. Now you can interpret it. That's cool. I'm good with that. But start with the facts. Start, just the facts, man, right. And lay it out for us. How do you deal with some of the timing on this?
So I was just thinking of when you said use facts, right? Our recent testimonial that we generated, which I just added into the sales deck, by the way, Michael. So Inside Baseball listeners, don't basically, we collected some testimonials. I'd like you to review them specifically for that, right? Because there's a really nice fact. And, what we're hearing from, to speak on Security Weekly for a moment, what we're hearing from our partners is when they come on the show and they do an appearance, that there is a relatively short amount of time that goes by before someone is interested and moves to purchase. And I'm like, wow. That's really powerful. Now we got to talk about how we do that. Like, I don't know. I just sit around and talk to people, right? And that's, a strategy. And then there's more strategy behind just sitting around and talking to people. But that casual environment, I think, is useful. But having that fact is a good starting point, right? To start having those conversations about value and backing up your value proposition. And so I like using facts. But put them in context and help with the interpretation too.
And I'm going to come back to what I said before, right? Structure, substance, and then style. Structure is what lets you be transparent, even though you might have to wait and figure out the substance. Or structure helps you get the substance you need to communicate back. In the years that I've figured out how to do this, by introducing a simple structure, like the Straight Talk framework, and making sure everybody's comfortable with that structure, now your substance can ride over it however you need it to, whenever you need it to, et cetera, et cetera. And that tends to go really well. So last piece, and again, this is something I'm seeing everybody do. So I put this out. It's a fairly long. It's a longer article than we're going to cover it, but it talks about building a skills inventory. And the reason I think this is so important is when we start looking at the perception of a skills shortage or the perception of a shortage in security overall. A lot of people I talk to them when I say, well, what are you hiring for? Well, I need someone in security. And you read some of these job descriptions, and it's stuff that doesn't exist, or it's combinations that are not really typical of career paths today, or it's just outlandish.
I think the experts are the ones that there is truly, maybe not so much a shortage, but there's only a certain number of experts. And John Stratton and I thought, had a great conversation about this, and John really put this in context because he works with a lot of different organizations in enterprises and enterprise security teams. And he's like, look, dude, in a lot of organizations, he's like, you know, I can pinpoint the expert right away. Like, that's the person that came up when there wasn't a security team, right? Had some other skills, has been building it for 20 years, and they're an expert. But guess what? There's only so many of those experts in security today. So how do we enable the mid-level and the junior people to be effective so that the expert can still practice their trade but be effective? He drew the line. And he said, look, a lot of organizations have this expert and they drop that person in a lab and they're like, yeah, go play with stuff. He's like, nope, the expert has to be aligned to the business objectives and also help enable the middle and junior folks to be effective at their jobs as well. I thought it was last week's Enterprise Security Weekly, nail on the head, right?
Yep. No, he's got it exactly right. Everybody who tells me that they've got a challenge hiring, I always ask, what's your development program look like? And they go, well, I don't have one. That's why you're having a problem hiring. Everybody who doesn't have a problem hiring, they can tell me what skills they were hiring for, how they knew that person would fit the team, and how they were going to advance their development as a contributor to the team. Those people, Paul, consistently don't have a problem finding or hiring anybody. In fact, I get almost as many people now telling me, is there really a shortage? Because I've applied for a bunch of jobs and no one's even calling me back. Right. So here's what I think it comes down to then. So what's your team capable of? Right? And this is a skills inventory. This is not an aptitudes. This is not an attitudes and beliefs. This is a what skills does your team currently have? And then therefore, what skills do you need? Like, where are you overlapped? So for example, if all you've done are hire people that have pen testing experience, that's awesome. But then does that give you your compliance or your governance experience? It might, depends on their backgrounds. But so you need to take a look at what your functions are as a team, and then you've got to match that up to it. Basically says, and it walks you through, right? Go through, inventory the skill sets, then organize them so you can make sense out of them, analyze what you've got, and then make a plan. That's where I would start. So if you think that you've got a skill shortage, cool. But the more clear and detailed you can be on where that shortage for you is, the better your plan will be to stop it up, to get the right people in for it, or to develop for it. But I'm completely in alignment with John. I don't think that what we have so much as a skills problem is we got an information sharing problem.
It's like a misalignment, I think.
We have a miscommunication problem. Yeah, misalignment, miscommunication, uncertain expectations. You know, if I ask somebody today, generally describe for me what a CFO does, or generally describe for me what a CEO does, or a chief marketing officer, or what does the head of sales do? We kind of know. So cool. What's a CISO do? Yeah, we don't know yet. We're not at that level of maturity.
No? I think maybe 5-10 years ago that might have been the more common answer. I think today that's gotten a lot better. But
it's funny that you bring this up. I'll just share what I started working on last week with one of the clients is a model to say, so what does a business centric CISO need to look like? And we're specifically looking at how do we develop the capabilities in their business so that everybody can still be as technical as they want, but can interact and collaborate with the business. But they've got a couple people that raised their hands and said, look, I want to be a CISO someday. How do we get there? Yep, we're looking at building that pathway out because it's for precisely that. But what I'm looking at then is what everybody calls the soft skills that usually make me cringe. But that's I'm looking at how do we build a business-centric function in security, which is a welcome change.
Absolutely.
So that's what we got. All right, well, so we're going to take a quick break, which is a good chance. Check us out, securityweekly.com. You can sample our shows, check out the on-demand content. You can interact with us, let us know what's up. And when we come back, Edna Conway is going to join Paul. They're going to discuss intellectual property protection.
Domain Tools help security analysts turn threat data into threat intelligence. They take indicators from your network, including domains and IP addresses, and connect them with nearly every active domain on the internet. Those connections drive risk assessments, help profile attackers, guide online fraud investigations, and map cyber activity to attacker infrastructure. Fortune 1000 companies, global government agencies, and leading security solutions vendors use the Domain Tools platform as a critical ingredient in their threat investigations and proactive defenses. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/domain tools. Are your existing solutions able to take advantage of real threat intelligence? Common solutions like firewalls weren't designed to handle the massive and growing volume of threat indicators. This challenge often results in significant gaps in your protections, even when you think you have it covered. You need to protect yourself by filtering network traffic against unique threat indicators in a way that allows you to act. Polywall by Bandora Systems is the solution that filters over 10 million indicators right out of the box. Developed in partnership with the Department of Defense, Polywall is affordable for companies of all sizes. Get your free trial today at bandorasystems.com. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. Michael Santarcangelo is somewhere in the world helping people communicate and hopefully doing a good job at that, as he always does. So he is not here this week for the show. However, I would like to welcome back to the program Edna Conway from Cisco Systems. She's the Chief Security Officer for the Global Value Chain and an attorney. Do I say former attorney or attorney? Is that...
I think I'm still always an attorney. I like to say I'm a reformed attorney.
Reformed attorney. Well, Edna, welcome back to Business Security Weekly. It's nice to have you.
My pleasure.
And we're talking about IP, but not the IP like layer 3. We're talking about intellectual property today, which I think it's so important to have this discussion, Edna, in a business context. It was one of those things that I wish I paid attention to more when I went to business school and then had some real world life experiences with intellectual property, and I'm excited to have the discussion today. And I think we want to start off by talking about what is intellectual property, and we use these terms like patents and trademarks and copyright, and how do we, get a handle on what all those things mean, especially to us as business owners.
Yeah, so it's a great area to be thinking about, particularly in the context of security. But by way of background, let's just sort of set the stage, right? What I'll talk about is a general sense. A lot of it will rely on some U.S. law as examples, but keep in mind that there are many nations around the globe who focus on protecting intellectual property. Let's start first with a fundamental misperception, specifically, in all honesty, with patents, but also applicable to copyrights and trademarks, right? There is sometimes a perception that it gives you a right. A patent or a copyright, it's not a right to use, but rather it's actually the right to stop others from making money from an invention or from duplicating in a way that has commercial value what we'll talk about, which is an original work, which is copyrightable, right? So let's just start with patents. I mean, in most nations around the world, there are some fundamental concepts on what you need to have in order to patent a so-called invention. It has to be non-obvious, or is the language that's usually used in most nations. So let's call that in plain English. It has to be new. It has to be novel. If it's granted, by the way, the general average life varies a little bit nation to nation, is 20 years that you have that right in which to preclude others from actually engaging in commercial use and practicing, i.e. making or selling the invention. And I guess there's one thing that's really important to me, which is if you go back years ago to what fundamentally caused us to think about patents, we wanted to encourage invention for the common good of humankind. And so often certain things that you might think are a fantastic invention or discovery are not patentable because they need to be there for all humanity. And a classic example of that is a math equation or a theorem. You can't patent it. We all need to be able to use it. It's a fantastic discovery. So let's move on from patents to copyright. Copyright is generally, it protects the expression, if you will, of an idea in any form. It could, in this day and age, actually be software, right? It could be code. It could be a traditional work of art. It could be a work of authorship. So think words, sounds, visual creations, software, digital embodiment of those kinds of works. It's complicated in the sense that the number of years of protection that you get to preclude someone from using your work in a way that you did not authorize and from which you did not benefit if you choose to do so is probably anywhere from over 100 years to something less. So let's just look at the U.S. as an example. And I'll talk about works that were created after January 1st, 1978, because there was a whole different set of laws. For works created after 78, it's the life of the author plus 70 years, which is a very interesting choice of numbers. The thing that's really interesting is, like patents, there are certain things, right, that you can't have a copyright in. So what might those be? Anonymous works. If you don't identify yourself, if you will, as the creator of this expression of an idea, or if you do it under a pseudonym, which is quite interesting, it is not generally copyrightable. And here's the one that I think all of us who work for anyone, whether we are in a gig economy where we're doing services, or whether we're actually working directly as an employee for an employer, a work made for hire, right, which is basically everything for what we create for our clients and or our employers, is generally not something that you can create for yourself if you've engaged in some kind of agreement with your employer.
And now, copyright is different in that it doesn't require the use in commerce or use in making money. Essentially, is that true?
Well, I think that is true. It has to be the emphasis on copyright is an original work, right? So this is why we see so much debate in this day and age about, is there a section, for example, of music that is so similar that it infringes on the copyright of someone else, or if it was not copyrighted, is it something that can't be copyrighted because it's not original, because it relied on that? So too with patents, right? Prior art.
And there's a ton of, in music especially, which is, I'm actually studying for an upcoming talk if it gets accepted at DerbyCon, and I've seen it in other security talks in different genres of music, rock and roll and rap specifically. There's a lot of sampling and borrowing of music, and a lot of legal cases that have gone pretty much either way. And I think, we see that in security when we borrow an image from somewhere or use some other type of work. So I think it definitely plays in our space today.
I think it does. And I think it's always important for us to remember that at some point, we talked about the societal good, like patents, there's an underlying right to use these unique original works or expressions if the use is for the good of society. So think about, it's called fair use in the US and in many other nations, but think about for political debate, for satire, for education in a school, for other non-commercial uses. So we want to recognize innovation when it's used to make money, but we also want to spread the wealth on innovation in non-commercial environments. And that's really poignant with trademark, right? A trademark is something that's a little bit different. Trademark or a service mark is generally it's a word or a phrase or a symbol or a design or a combination of those. It can also even be things like smells, and sometimes sounds, but this is about identifying a specific set of goods, or a source of goods or services. So when you think about, for example, the classic example is for those of us who are of a certain age, the Good Humor truck, right? It had a specific jingle. That was Good Humor. That actually was, believe it or not, a trademark. And it was related to the Good Humor products of ice cream. And so the point is we don't want to confuse consumers. And it goes to one of the fundamental things we talk about in security, which is counterfeit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? A trademark allows you as an acquirer of a service or an acquirer of a good to say, I know this is sort of the imprimatur of genuineness.
Right. Now, are trademarks different in that in order to maintain your trademark, you have to protect it and you have to keep using it? Are those two things that are associated solely with trademarks?
Well, so patents, you don't really have to use it. You are correct.
Mm-hmm.
That is also true with copyright. The rules around trademark are a little bit complicated and they vary depending on the nation, but you have hit the nail on the head with the general concept is I am saying that this is associated with something I offer in commerce and I don't want to confuse the buyer or user of it. Mm-hmm. If you are no longer offering it for commerce, the question becomes, is it a valid trade or service mark any longer? Because you could have precluded the very purpose of the grant of the mark, right? And you also need to do something to tell the world that it is in fact something that's a mark, whether it's you're officially registered with, in the US, for example, the circle with the R, or whether it's the simple circle with or just without a circle, a TM, which says, hey, I've applied for this. It is a trademark, or there may be some common law rights in it as well.
Right. Yeah, we could do a whole series on trademark alone.
I think we could, but I think what I wanted to spend a little time talking to you about was, and this is a sort of odd thing to say, but I do have a favorite form of intellectual property, and my favorite form of intellectual property is a trade secret, right? Because it's so broad. There's a beauty to the trade secret. You don't file anywhere. You don't register anywhere. Most democratic nations and some non-democratic nations recognize trade secrets. It's confidential business information that gives you some kind of competitive edge. So it can be things that we often don't necessarily equate with an invention. But suppose you have a complicated pricing scheme in my world with the full spectrum of the third parties with whom you operate. Pricing scheme and who you give what discount to based on what they've done in terms of value-added resale, volume of business, et cetera, that could be a trade secret. Examples are very broad on trade secrets as well. It's not as narrow. It could be the research and development information around software algorithms. It could be R&D around hardware. Massworks, for example, are actually copyrightable. You might choose not to copyright them. It could be designs. It could be formulas.
Now, I've used in the past, and I want to run this by you and get your take on it, the recipe for Coca-Cola. We seem to always come down to the recipe for Coca-Cola. Now, what I've been told is that the recipe isn't so much of a secret. What I identified as a secret is I'm like, it's probably how they're able to mass produce and distribute that recipe, not so much the recipe itself. Is that an example of a good example of trade secret?
You know, that's a great debate. And because they've been so good about keeping it a trade secret, I would argue that it's a little bit of both, right? I mean, it's because at the end of the day, a recipe is only down to ingredients. And you are correct. If you get your hands on the recipe, just because you have it, you may not be able to actually duplicate it with the same taste, consistency, texture, and all the things that go into a recipe. And if you do it, you might be able to do it once, but can you do it around the world in a consistent way? Think, for example, McDonald's. I mean, obviously there's variability on raw materials in enterprise products. There's variability on the quality of ingredients. How can you have the same taste in Shenzhen, China, as you have in, St. Petersburg, Florida, right?
Well, I think about it like cigars. It's a
little bit of both, Paul.
I think about it like cigars, too. A lot of cigars, I know the ingredients. I know which plants, which priming, all of the different types, which countries they're grown in. Could I reproduce that? No way. To go from seed to cigar is a proprietary secret to every single cigar company, and that's what differentiates them. So
I think that's a great example. And so let's not forget, remember I said it was my favorite IP, and it's because it's so broad. The process, use your cigar example. I'm not a cigar smoker, but it could be that I only pick the leaves. You might know where they're from, but I only pick them at this level of maturity. It could be that I expose them to this level of drying at this temperature for this period of time. So there's a whole set of variabilities that may not be registerable. And remember, you register because you're getting it right for someone else not to use it. Suppose you want to use it in perpetuity. But here's the kicker with this favorite form of IP, the trade secret. It's only as good as a couple of things. One, it has to provide you with a competitive advantage, and you have to be able to prove that by saying it is unknown to others, right? And most legal systems around the world say, hey, if it was disclosed in an unauthorized fashion, that doesn't mean you gave it up. It just means somebody disclosed it and they shouldn't have, and that violates trade secret. But here's the beauty of the trade secret. Why you really want to have one, that if you want to retain something in perpetuity, is you want to make sure that someone else doesn't have an unfair advantage. So how do you pursue the theft of a trade secret? You say you have unfair competitive advantage because you got something that it took me 50 years to develop and perfect. And now you can do it in exactly the same way without the 50 years of investment, time, energy, resources, et cetera, put in. And so I think that's something that I want to link to our discussion about security, which is what we always talk about.
And that's really interesting. So there is case law around trade secrets. However, it's not something that I can go apply necessarily for a patent, a copyright, or a trademark.
That's correct. And I think the beauty of trade secrets can very quickly disappear to dust if you do not recognize that you have to take steps to keep it secret. And those steps have to be reasonable under the circumstances. Well, you can imagine how broad that is, because this is all case law. There's not a lot of statutory law. There is some on what, an unfair and deceptive practice is. But the reality is the burden is on you. You want to keep it secret? What are you going to do to keep it secret? And that's why we're talking about these sort of lawyer-like things in a discussion about security, right? So at the end of the day, security is the ticket to ensuring our IP is protected.
So if you have identified a trade secret, it's similar to a trademark in that I have to identify and protect it as a trade secret in order to defend it if someone were to steal it?
Close, but not quite, because you don't want to. You can identify it to yourself. You don't want to identify it to the world as a trade secret, right? I mean, you don't want to.
Then it's not a secret anymore.
Trademark, you have to tell the world this is a mark and it's associated with me. Whereas, go back to your cigar, right? The particular process for your cigar, that's your favorite cigar, even though you know all the ingredients, and in this day and age, you might actually want to ascertain that those ingredients were sustainably sourced, and you can get that information. You can't get the process of making it give you the enjoyment as you're, God love you, Paul, sucking on that wonderful cigar.
And it's interesting, though, and I've interviewed hundreds of people in the cigar industry. And you get to that point where they're like, no, I'm not going to tell you the process. Exactly. They'll give you some hints around it, but like those closely guarded secrets, like no way are they giving those up. Even outside of the show, like they're not giving that stuff up.
They're not giving them up. What the challenge is that people forget is, if it gets disclosed in an unauthorized fashion, let's say it's completely legitimate. It's not unauthorized. Let's say there's a lawsuit and somebody subpoenas some information. The subpoena is handled appropriately. The owner of the trade secret says, you know what, I'm going to fight the subpoena. I really don't want it out there. I don't trust the court clerk. I don't trust the person who's going to, review this, whoever it is, because this is the classic example, in all honesty, where the secret to success and the secret to the problems lie with us, the carbon-based units. It's not in technology. We have to take steps to keep it secret. So lots of people say to me, well, in a defense and theft environment, you spend an awful lot of time talking about not just misuse of IP, my friend, but Edna, you're always harping on the least privileged principle, on the need to know. And the reason why is, in a world where your trade secrets need to be protected, how are you effectively segregating and ascertaining whether people really need to know? Because I can make a pretty darn good argument that if you have information that only a small set of researchers need to know, and it's available because you're using, let's not even say it's a public cloud, it's a on-prem, solely enterprise-based cloud that you monitor and you control, but you've given, the sales team, and you've given the channel organization, and you've given the finance organization access to that, when they don't really need to have that access. Now the question becomes, and this is an interesting debate, can you, without it even getting outside, eviscerate the benefit of your magic trade secret protection, which, by the way, doesn't last for any year. It lasts as long as you're good about ensuring security around it. Therein lies the rub. What are you doing internally? And now what are you doing with that external third-party ecosystem to make sure they only have what they need to have to do what it is that you're asking of them successfully?
And that's one of the most challenging things that I think we face in security is how do we, especially as the business grows, manage who has access to what information? I think that's one of the things that growing pains, that's like my number one growing pain in terms of security.
Yeah, you raised something really interesting. I was talking about this with someone the other day, and I said, I think we've reached a point where in the connected world, what we now need is a set of players who may be from multiple places, multiple enterprises, doing different things, but they all need to sit together and literally, forgive me, I'm an old, crew jock, so they need to be in lockstep with their oars, with their movement in and out of the water. Perfect sync. Well, how do you do that without wanting very viscerally to say, let's share all the information with all of the team members to make sure we're all aligned? That's great. That sounds fantastic, but you may have just eviscerated your trade secret protection. So step back a little bit and say, how can I enable that kind of synchronicity across my third-party ecosystem and even across the third-party environment within my own enterprise, right? Sales talking to legal talking to finance, the folks who are doing IoT, talking to the guys who are doing cloud, talking to the guys who are doing different collaboration capabilities without revealing everything. Is there a way to do that? And it starts to force you to say, if I think about the principle of least privilege, now I start to ask a fundamental question. What do I think they need to know? And you know what? You won't always get it right.
Yeah.
But the beauty is if you start narrow and you find a justification for why it should be broadened, your trade secret protection remains in place because you had a justification for why you broadened it. So that kind of logic and that kind of application of security segregation is a beautiful thing.
Do you find that external threat actors are typically going after trade secrets, or is this more like an insider thing? Like when things have gone wrong and a trade secret has gotten out, like what's usually the cause?
Now that's a loaded question. I think there's ample evidence out there that the so-called malicious insider can frequently, if they're savvy, cause more damage by the revelation and sharing of information without engaging in any sophisticated IT attack.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
That is for sure a glaring example that we have in every industry, in every space. Number one. So, at the end of the day, I always say you've talked with several of my colleagues. I like to say that the real currency of the digital world is actually trust. It's the same currency we've always had, right? Back when you were worried about whether the half erect Cro-Magnon person behind you was going to hit you with the club or the woolly mammoth, it's the same currency. Data is actually the fuel that allows you to build the trust, and techniques like things like enhanced intelligence, distributed ledger technology, we could keep going, machine learning. What they do is allow you to believe in the integrity of the data, which is the fuel, which still gets you the same old thing, which is, do I trust the human? That's a long-winded way of saying it's not just the insider. I think we're going to see, if we do not understand trade secrets on one side, and not really on one side, let's say in the center, and the protective environment of IT security and physical security. Imagine something as simple as this. You're in a plant, and let's make it my world, information communications technology. You're in a plant that's building printed circuit boards or printed circuit board assemblies. How many people need to walk down the line that are building your printed circuit board assembly? If you put a really good EE or somebody who knows ASICs on that line, they're going to figure out a tremendous amount. There's no hack. There's no IT involved. They walk down the line. Or better yet, put them in a test environment or put them in the failure analysis lab and let them see what's happening. Heavens to Betsy, a brilliant human mind can ascertain a tremendous amount of information from that. So I think we're getting to the point where if attackers are smart and their motivation is economic, boy, what I'd be doing is I'd be looking for ways in to take the most valuable information, whether that information is your trade secret as an enterprise or the fact that you may have a refrigerated medication in your connected refrigerator and you don't really want anybody to know that you're on that medication because we'll reveal way too much about you. So consumer and enterprise are converging in the connected world.
Now, what about and this question comes up all the time, and I believe it relates to trade secrets, is if an individual works for a company and then either leaves or gets fired from that company, and then they want to go work for a competitor. First, it's a two-part question, right? How is the individual protected so that they can go pursue a career? And then from the company side, how do you protect your trade secret in that environment and strike a balance between the two?
Really hard. So there's been an ebb and flow. Let's just look even in the United States. To be honest with you, Europe is actually more restrictive on this. But, in the U.S., we look at, non-competition clauses with a very careful level of scrutiny for the exact reason you articulated. There needs to be balance. Imagine, for example, if you're an expert on, I was just talking to somebody this morning and we were debating something and I said, well, ultimately, I think what I may be doing is building a Faraday cage and living inside of it. I mean, that's my solution, right? It's a completely sustainable water supply, food supply, all in a Faraday cage. That's my solution. Do you want to live like that? I don't want to live like that. That's your expertise. Let's say your expertise is sustainable Faraday cage to enable the human who wants to opt out of the digital age, and there are some of them. At the end of the day, you have to be able to use your expertise. What you can't do is actually use that expertise in precisely the same way that the enterprise or the client for whom you were engaged, right, a work for hire, for whom you created something and designed it and deployed it, but it's all theirs. You just got paid for it, has paid you that consummate price. And that price is to say, I own it. Now you cannot utilize it. So the ticket is a balancing act, and it depends. If you're an author and you only write on a certain topic, that would be harder to talk about what we could preclude you from doing rather than somebody who is a ghostwriter who has written memoirs, who has written technical books, who has written children's stories, right? They have a vast array of areas where they can earn a living. At the end of the day, here's the preclusion argument. You don't want to stop people who are innovative, who have built up a mass of expertise from engaging in the utilization of that expertise for their own livelihood and, quite frankly, for the good of others. But the flip side, to your point, is that's great. Just don't make that cigar using the process that I just articulated with, where I grow the plants may be known, but how long I make them mature, how long I dry them out, in what temperature, I don't know, if you're a wine person, you can have debates with those who are true connoisseurs about the distinction between the age of the wood, the shape of the barrel. All of these have impact. Those matter. Those things matter. There's no easy answer to this. It's a balancing act. And if you're writing a non-competition clause, particularly in the U.S., in this day and age, it needs to be very narrowly tailored. And they are generally looked on with disfavor for the reasons that I just articulated.
Right. So what can, I guess, summarize, and what can organizations do to first help identify your trade secrets and then protect them moving forward?
So I think know where your IP is and what it is, right? And I would say spend a lot of time focusing on your trade secrets, because you probably know what's patentable and what patents you have and copyrights and trademarks. Your legal team has partnered with you on that. Think about whether you have something that actually creates commercial advantage for you that is not well known. And then think about, where is it documented? How is it duplicated? And what steps can you take at a physical level, at a behavioral level with the humans, as well as at an information access level, to protect it sufficiently that if someone challenged you and said, I actually got that in a legitimate way, and I'm now going to go duplicate it, that you would be able to say, no, you received it in an illegitimate way, not with my authorization. First, you'd have to prove that. The real test is, and here's the reasonable steps under the circumstances that I undertook to actually protect it. If you can answer those questions, you have a better argument. But think about it at the beginning. We often talk about design for security. Design for security should include design for trade secret protection.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And something we often don't talk about here on the network. So I'm glad we had this conversation. Edna, any closing thoughts beyond that? Or are you going to be at the Black Hat conference coming up? And a lot of people are planning to attend and planning for that conference.
Yeah, I think Black Hat's going to be great this year. Unfortunately, I will not be in attendance, but I think I'd leave everybody with the thought that security doesn't live alone. Security lives in a world where it's designed to protect both us, the individuals, and we, the enterprises. Think about it in that construct and make security work for you and for your business.
Edna Conway, thank you so much for appearing on Business Security Weekly yet again.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. We'll see you next time.